The invitation for the annual company gala sat on her desk for a full week before she finally picked it up. Her full name was printed on the thick cream-colored card in elegant swirling letters. To her it felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. A quiet dread had been sitting in the pit of her stomach, growing a little heavier with each passing day. These company events were always a special kind of challenge for her. She was a woman who found comfort in the predictable rhythm of her work, the quiet focus of her own desk. She was good with numbers, with spreadsheets, with the silent logic of a well-organized plan. But these parties, they were a minefield of small talk. It was the endless circling of conversations about the weather, about television shows she never watched, about sports she didn't follow. She would stand there, a polite smile fixed on her face while her mind searched desperately for something, anything to say. It was exhausting. But this year the new boss had decided to go all out. He was a man full of big energy and even bigger ideas about what made a team work. He believed that forcing people to be cheerful and social together was the secret. So he had rented the grand ballroom at the old fancy Royal Hotel. Everyone in the office was talking about it. They were excited about the free food, the open bar, the chance to dress up. She heard the chatter and tried to share their enthusiasm, but the feeling just wouldn't come. The night of the gala, she stood in front of her closet for a long time. She finally chose a simple dark blue dress. It was safe. It wouldn't attract too much attention. She looked at herself in the mirror and practiced her smile. It looked a little tight, a little strained. She took a deep breath. Just a few hours, she told her reflection. You can get through a few hours. The Royal Hotel was even more grand than she had imagined. Huge crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing little specks of rainbow light across the walls. The floor was so shiny she could see her own reflection in it. And in the very center of the room, standing proudly on a small raised platform, was a grand piano. It was a beautiful, monstrous thing, made of deep polished wood that gleamed under the lights. Its lid was propped open like the wing of a giant silent bird. She looked at it and felt a strange, cold flicker in her chest, a feeling she quickly pushed down. She found her assigned table, nodded and smiled at her coworkers, and took a seat near the back. The room was filled with the loud, happy buzz of people enjoying themselves. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of fancy-looking snacks and glasses of champagne. She took a glass just to have something to hold in her hands. Her new boss, a man we'll call the manager, was the star of the evening. He moved through the crowd like a friendly tornado, clapping people on the back, laughing loudly, his voice booming across the room. He was a large man, not just in size but in presence. He filled up the space around him. He believed his job was to be the life of the party, to make sure everyone was having fun, whether they wanted to or not. She watched him from her safe distance, sipping her champagne. She saw him gather a group of young interns, telling them a loud, animated story, his hands flying everywhere. She saw him drag a reluctant accountant from her department onto the dance floor for a clumsy twirl. She made a silent wish that she could just become invisible, a ghost at the feast, watching but not seen. Dinner was served, and for a little while she felt a bit safer. There was the distraction of food, of passing the salt, of commenting on how good the roast chicken was. She could manage these small, scripted interactions. She even shared a genuine laugh with the woman sitting next to her about the tiny, fancy dessert that was gone in 2 bites. But as the plates were cleared away, her anxiety began to creep back. The manager stood up and tapped his microphone. The room fell quiet, all eyes turning towards him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice echoing through the speakers. What a fantastic night. Look at all these beautiful, smiling faces. She forced her own smile a little wider, hoping it looked real. The manager gave a speech. It was the usual stuff, about teamwork, about the great year they'd had, about the bright future ahead. He thanked everyone for their hard work. People clapped in all the right places. She clapped along with them, her hands feeling numb. Then his tone changed. It became more playful, more mischievous. And now, he said, a wide grin spreading across his face, it's time for a little unscheduled impromptu entertainment. Her heart gave a single hard thump against her ribs. This was his signature move. She had heard stories from last year's event, about how he had made one of the guys from the mailroom sing a love song. The guy had been bright red and miserable, but everyone had laughed. And the manager had called it a great team-building moment. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for potential victims. Please, she thought, don't let it be me. Please let him pick someone else. anyone else. The manager's eyes scanned the crowd, a playful glint in them. They swept past her table, and for a blessed second she thought she was safe. Then his gaze stopped, backtracked, and landed directly on her. A cold wave washed over her from the top of her head down to her toes. "No, our very own quiet star from the accounts department," he boomed, pointing a finger right at her. The spotlight operator, following his lead, swung the bright white light onto her table. She was suddenly blinded, the rest of the room fading into a dark blur. The heat of the light felt like a physical weight. She could feel every single pair of eyes in the room staring at her. Her polite smile was frozen solid on her face. "I heard a rumor," the manager continued, his voice full of warm, magnanimous charm. "A little bird told me that this brilliant young lady here was quite the piano prodigy in her youth. Isn't that right?" She felt the blood drain from her face so quickly she felt dizzy. The piano, how? How could he possibly know? She had never ever mentioned it to anyone at work. It was a part of her life that was sealed shut, buried deep. It must have been some old, forgotten line in a resume from a decade ago, or maybe a casual mention from a distant relative who knew someone in the office. It didn't matter how he knew. The fact was he did. She gave a small, frantic shake of her head, a silent plea. "No, it's not true. Please no." But the manager, fueled by his own confidence and a few glasses of wine, took her panic for modesty. "Oh, don't be so shy," he laughed. "Come on, everyone. Let's give her a big round of encouragement. Come on up here and grace us with a tune. Let's hear it for her." The room, eager to please the boss and caught up in the moment, erupted in loud, enthusiastic applause. It wasn't mean-spirited. They were just following his lead, thinking they were supporting a shy colleague. But to her the clapping sounded like thunder, like a trap snapping shut. She was trapped. There was no way out. If she refused, she would look rude, ungrateful, a party pooper. She would embarrass the manager in front of everyone. She could already imagine the cold, awkward atmosphere that would follow, the sideways glances she would get at work on Monday. The weight of social expectation was a chain around her ankles. Her body seemed to move on its own, disconnected from her mind, which was screaming in silent protest. She stood up. Her legs felt like they were made of wood. The applause grew louder, more encouraging. People were smiling at her. She saw their faces as blurry, smiling masks. She began the long walk towards the piano. The distance across the ballroom felt like a mile. Each step was heavy and slow. The bright spotlight followed her, making her the absolute center of the universe, a place she never ever wanted to be. She could feel the manager's satisfied, beaming smile on her back. She reached the small platform. The grand piano loomed over her, huge and intimidating. The black and white keys seemed to stare back at her, a grid of forgotten memories and old pain. She could smell the faint, familiar scent of polished wood and old felt. It was a smell that unlocked a door in her mind, a door she had kept locked for over 20 years. She slowly sat down on the polished wooden bench. It was cold and hard. She placed her small evening purse down beside her. Her hands resting in her lap were trembling. She looked out at the crowd. They were all still looking at her, their faces expectant, waiting for a show. The manager gave her 2 big, enthusiastic thumbs up. She took a deep, shaky breath that didn't seem to fill her lungs. This was really happening. There was no escape. She had to play something. Anything. She turned back to the piano, a prisoner of politeness, about to confront a ghost from her past that she had tried so very hard to forget. The polished wood of the piano bench was cool and smooth beneath her. It felt like a slab of stone holding her prisoner in this spotlight. The noise of the room, the clapping, the murmurs, the clinking of glasses seemed to fade into a dull, roaring sound in her ears, like she was listening to the world from the bottom of a deep well. Her own heartbeat was the loudest thing she could hear, a frantic, pounding drum against her ribs. She looked down at her hands, resting in her lap. They looked like they belonged to someone else. Pale, slender fingers now feeling completely numb and disconnected from her body. How could these strange hands possibly remember how to do this? It had been more than 20 years. 20 years since her fingers had last danced across these black and white keys. She had been a different person then. A girl with a future that felt wide open and safe, not a woman carrying the quiet weight of a lifetime of grief. The crowd was still watching, their expectant smiles starting to feel heavy. She could see the manager out of the corner of her eye, still beaming with pride at his own cleverness. He had no idea. He thought he was giving a shy woman a moment to shine. He couldn't see the invisible walls closing in around her. She had to play something. Anything. If she just sat here, frozen, the silence would become awkward, and the moment would stretch into something truly unbearable. She needed to get this over with. A simple tune. Something easy. Something from so far back in her childhood that it might still be there, buried deep in her muscles. Her mind, scrambling through a fog of panic, landed on a piece. It was a simple, beautiful classical piece by a composer named Debussy. It was called Clair de Lune, and which meant moonlight. Her mother had loved this piece. She had been the one to teach it to her. Sitting beside her on the old scratched piano bench in their sunlit living room, the memory was like a ghost, faint and far away. Slowly, as if moving through thick syrup, she lifted her numb hands and placed them on the keys. The ivory was cool and familiar under her fingertips. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, like touching a photograph of a person you loved who was long gone. She took another shaky breath that didn't seem to reach her lungs. She found the starting notes, her fingers finding their positions by some ancient, forgotten instinct. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to block out the hundreds of watching people, trying to find that one, simple melody in the quiet of her mind. She pressed down. The first note rang out, clear and pure in the hushed ballroom. It hung in the air for a moment, a single beautiful sound. Then another note followed, and another. They were halting, a little clumsy, but they were the right notes. The beginning of the gentle, flowing melody of Clair de Lune began to fill the room. A small, relieved murmur went through the crowd. See, she could do it. The manager's smile widened. He had been right. He had uncovered a hidden talent. But for her, something else was happening. As her fingers moved from that first chord to the next, something shifted in the air around her. It was a scent. A sudden, impossibly vivid scent that hit her with the force of a physical blow. It was the smell of gardenias and vanilla, her mother's perfume. It was so real, so powerful. It was as if her mother had just walked up and stood right behind her. It mixed with another smell, one even older and more deeply buried, the faint, waxy smell of the old, slightly out-of-tune piano from her childhood home, the one her father had sold soon after the accident because no one could bear to look at it anymore. The ballroom around her seemed to shimmer and dissolve. The bright, hot spotlight became the warm afternoon sun streaming through the living room window. The muffled sounds of the gala became the distant, comfortable sounds of her father moving around in the kitchen. The cold, polished grand piano under her fingers became the familiar, slightly worn keys of her childhood practice piano. She was no longer a woman in her 30s, trapped at a party. She was a girl of 12, sitting on the bench, her feet barely touching the floor, and her mother was sitting right beside her. She could feel the warmth of her mother's body next to her. She could see her mother's hands, so much like her own, resting on her lap. She could hear her voice, soft and encouraging. That's it, my love. Gently feel the music. Don't just play the notes. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked at the corners of her eyes. She kept playing, her fingers now moving with a life of their own, tracing the old familiar path of the music. But the melody was no longer just a series of notes. It was a time machine. It was pulling her back, dragging her into a past she had worked so hard to lock away. With every chord, another memory broke free. She remembered the feel of her mother's hand on her shoulder, a light, proud squeeze after she finally mastered a difficult passage. She remembered the sound of her mother's laughter, a sound like little bells when she made a silly mistake and played a comically wrong note. She remembered the way the sunlight would catch the gold in her mother's hair as she leaned over to point at a place in the sheet music. This piano, this music, had been their special language. It was a world they shared, a world of beauty and feeling that was just for the two of them. Her mother wasn't just a teacher. She was her duet partner, her biggest fan, her guide into a world of art and emotion. The music continued to flow from her fingers, the haunting, beautiful notes of Clair de Lune filling the grand ballroom. The people listening heard a lovely, if slightly hesitant, performance. But they couldn't see the storm raging inside the woman playing it. They couldn't see the little girl inside her, desperately reaching for a ghost. The scent of gardenias and vanilla was so strong now it made her feel dizzy. The vision of the sunny living room was so clear, so real, it was like she was living in two places at once. She was in the bright, noisy present and the warm, safe past, and the line between them was blurring, breaking down, And then as her hands moved into the next, more passionate section of the piece, the memory shifted. It didn't stay in the sunny living room. The beautiful music began to curdle, twisting into something else. The memory of her mother's smiling face began to morph. The smile faded. The warm, sunny living room grew dark. The happy memory was being overtaken by a darker one, the one that had ended it all. The music was no longer a comfort. It was a key, and it was unlocking a door she had sealed shut with pain and grief, a door she never ever wanted to open again. Her breath hitched in her chest. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thin, impossible to breathe. She was drowning in the past, drowning in a scent that shouldn't be there, in memories that were too sharp, too real. She was still playing, but the notes were becoming heavier, each one a struggle. The weight on her chest was growing, pressing down, squeezing the air from her lungs. The happy memory of her mother was being swallowed by the devastating truth of her loss, and it was all rushing back, fueled by the very song that had once been their greatest joy. The music kept flowing from her fingers, but it was no longer something she was consciously doing. It was as if her hands were moving on their own, powered by a ghost. The beautiful flowing notes of Claire de Lune filled the air, but inside her head a different terrifying scene was playing out. The past wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a reality she was being forced to relive. The scent of her mother's perfume, the gardenias and vanilla, was now so overpowering it made her feel sick. The bright lights of the ballroom had completely vanished. She was no longer sitting at a grand piano. She was back in her childhood home on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening. She was 12 years old, wearing her favorite blue pajamas, and she was practicing this very piece for an upcoming recital. Her mother was sitting on the sofa, listening with her eyes closed, a small, peaceful smile on her face. "Beautiful, my love," her mother had said, her voice soft and clear in the quiet room. "Just remember to slow down a little in the middle part. Let the music breathe." She could feel the warmth of the living room lamp on her skin. She could see the faint dust motes dancing in the light. It was all so real, so perfectly detailed. She felt the pride she had felt that night. The simple, pure happiness of being good at something, of making her mother proud. But then, the memory began to twist. The phone rang. In her mind, the sound was as sharp and sudden as a gunshot. It sliced through the beautiful music, shattering the peaceful moment. In the ballroom, her fingers stumbled for a half-second on the keys, hitting a note that was slightly too loud, slightly off. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats, sensing something was wrong, but most just thought it was a simple mistake. In her memory, she saw her father get up from his chair and walk to the old corded phone that hung on the kitchen wall. She heard his cheerful, "Hello?" She was annoyed at the interruption. Her 12-year-old self focused only on her practice. She kept playing, trying to block out the sound of her father's voice, but then, his voice changed. The cheerful tone vanished. It was replaced by a silence and then a single quiet, "What?" Her fingers kept moving over the piano keys, but inside, she was freezing. She knew this part. She knew what came next. She didn't want to remember. She tried to fight it, to pull herself back to the present, to the bright lights and the watching crowd. But the memory was too strong. It had its claws in her and it wasn't letting go. She heard her father's voice again, but now it was thin and strained. No, that can't be right. There must be a mistake. She remembered stopping her practice then, the music cutting off abruptly, just as it almost did now in the ballroom. Her hands trembled on the keys, the notes becoming shaky and weak. In the memory, she turned on the piano bench to look at her father. He was still holding the phone, but his hand was shaking. His face, which had always been so strong and sure, had gone a pale, sickly gray. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. "Dad?" her younger self had whispered. He didn't seem to hear her. He slowly lowered the phone back into its cradle. The click it made was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The memory was crushing her. The air in the ballroom felt thick and heavy like water. She was drowning in it. She tried to suck in a breath, but her chest was too tight. It was like a giant, invisible hand was squeezing her lungs, refusing to let them expand. Her playing became more and more disjointed. The lovely melody of Claire de Lune was falling apart, breaking into pieces. The notes were there, but the soul was gone, replaced by a rising tide of panic and pain. Back in the memory, her father finally looked at her. His eyes were filled with a horror she had never seen before. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out at first. He tried again. "It's your mother," he said, his voice a broken whisper. "There's been an accident." The words, even remembered after 20 years, hit her with the force of a physical blow. In the ballroom, her right hand came down hard on a cluster of keys, creating a jarring, discordant sound that made several people in the audience jump. The manager's smile finally vanished, replaced by a look of confused concern. This wasn't the graceful performance he had imagined. Something was very wrong, but she was beyond seeing him. She was lost in the living room of her past. After her father spoke those words, the world had simply stopped making sense. She remembered the police officers coming to the door, their hats held respectfully in their hands. She remembered the kind, tired look in the woman officer's eyes. She remembered the words, "I'm so sorry." Her car. The rain. She didn't suffer. They were words meant to comfort, but they felt like knives. She remembered the crushing, suffocating feeling that had descended on her then, the same feeling that was descending on her now. It was a feeling of the world breaking, of everything good and safe and happy being ripped away in a single terrible moment. And the worst part, the part that had haunted her for 20 years, was the connection, the unbreakable, horrible connection. Her mother had been coming home from the store. She had gone out to buy a specific kind of ribbon, a shiny satin ribbon to tie her daughter's hair for the piano recital that was scheduled for the next day. The recital never happened. The piano was never played in that house again. The music had died that night along with her mother. The piano became a monster in the corner of the living room, a silent, accusing reminder of that last happy practice session, of the phone call, of the loss. It was a symbol of the joy that had been stolen. Every note was tied to that pain. And now here she was playing that very same piece. The piece she had been practicing when her world ended. The guilt, the grief, the sheer, overwhelming loss of it all crashed over her in a single, devastating wave. It was too much. The memory was no longer a picture in her mind. It was a physical pain, a weight that was crushing her from the inside. Her fingers, which had been moving on pure muscle memory, finally stopped. They froze on the keys, pressing down, creating a low, dissonant hum. The music died. She couldn't breathe. She literally could not draw air into her lungs. The invisible hand was squeezing too hard. Her shoulders hunched forward. Her body began to shake. She gripped the edge of the piano, her knuckles turning white, as if it were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. A small, choked sound, a sob strangled by the lack of air, escaped her lips. The polite applause had died long ago. The room was utterly silent except for the low, sustained hum from the keys she was still pressing. The crowd was no longer watching a performance. They were witnessing a public unraveling. They saw a woman falling apart before their eyes, and they had no idea why. The fun, party atmosphere was gone, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence and a room full of people holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The silence in the ballroom was heavy and complete. It was a thick, uncomfortable blanket that had smothered all the laughter and chatter. The only sound was the low, dying hum from the piano strings, a sad and final sound. All eyes were fixed on the woman at the piano, who was now bent over the keys, her body trembling, fighting a desperate and losing battle for air. For a long moment, nobody moved. The scene was so strange, so far from the cheerful party they had been enjoying, that their minds couldn't quite understand it. They saw a woman falling apart, but they didn't know the story. They only saw the effect, not the cause. It was like watching a building collapse from a distance without hearing the explosion that caused it. The manager stood frozen near the front. His face, which had been so full of proud smiles just minutes before, was now a mask of pure confusion. His brain was trying to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. This wasn't shyness. This wasn't stage fright. This was something raw and real and terrifying. He had wanted to bring a shy employee out of her shell, but he had instead cracked open something deep and painful inside her, and he was watching it spill out in front of everyone. A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He had done this. His little joke, his attempt at fun, had caused this. He took a half step forward, his mouth opening to say something, maybe to call for help, maybe to try and make a joke to lighten the unbearable tension. But no words came out. He was paralyzed by his own shame and panic. While the manager was stuck, another person was not. A woman from the accounts department. The one who sat 2 desks over from the pianist was already moving. She was a quiet, observant person herself. She had noticed how her colleague had looked when the manager called her name, not shy but truly frightened, like a deer caught in the headlights of a car. She had watched the whole performance with a growing sense of unease, seeing the pain behind the music, not the joy. Now, she didn't hesitate. She pushed her chair back, the sound scraping loudly in the quiet room, and she walked quickly and purposefully towards the piano. She didn't run because running would cause more panic, but her steps were firm and sure. She reached the piano and didn't try to touch the trembling woman right away. Instead, she simply knelt down on the floor beside the bench, putting herself at eye level. She positioned her body to block the woman from the direct view of most of the crowd, creating a small private space in the very public room. "Hey," she said, her voice soft and low, a calm anchor in the storm. "It's okay. You're okay." The woman at the piano didn't seem to hear her. Her breaths were coming in short, ragged gasps. Her eyes were wide, staring at the piano keys but seeing something else entirely, something from 20 years ago. The kneeling woman tried again. "You don't have to play anymore," she whispered. "It's over. You can stop now." Slowly, very slowly, the words seemed to penetrate the wall of panic. The woman's trembling fingers, which were still pressed hard against the keys, relaxed slightly. She turned her head just a little, and her glassy, tear-filled eyes met the eyes of her coworker. Seeing a flicker of connection, the kneeling woman spoke again, her tone still gentle and steady. "Can you look at me? Just look at me. Try to breathe with me, okay? Just a little breath." She took an exaggerated, slow breath in and then let it out slowly, showing her how. It was a simple, childlike thing, but in that moment of extreme panic, it was a lifeline. The woman at the piano tried to mimic her. Her breath hitched, caught in her throat, and she choked. A sob finally broke free, a raw, painful sound that echoed in the silent room. "It's my mother." The woman managed to gasp out, the words torn from a place of deep old pain. That was all she needed to say. The kneeling coworker didn't need the whole story. Those 3 words were enough to explain a universe of grief. She understood instantly that this was not about a piano. This was about a memory. This was about a loss so profound that it had been locked away for decades, only to be broken open by a well-meaning but foolish request. "I understand," the coworker said, her voice filled with a simple human kindness. "You don't have to explain. Let's just get you out of here, okay? Let's go somewhere quiet." She gently placed a hand on the woman's arm, not to pull her but just to ground her, to remind her that she was here, in the present, and not lost in the past. This simple, compassionate action seemed to break the final spell of the manager's paralysis. He finally hurried over, his face pale and his earlier confidence completely gone. What's wrong? Is she sick? Should I call an ambulance?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. He was looking at the kneeling woman, hoping she had the answers he didn't. The kneeling woman looked up at him. Her expression wasn't angry, but it was firm. She shook her head slightly. "No ambulance," she said quietly but firmly. "She just needs some quiet. She needs to leave." The manager nodded, a quick, jerky motion. "Yes, of course. Whatever she needs." He was eager to help now, eager to fix the problem he had created. "My car is outside. I can drive her home." The kneeling woman looked at the terrified, broken woman on the bench and then back at the manager. She knew that the last person in the world her colleague would want to be trapped in a car with right now was him. "I'll take her home," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll take care of her." The manager looked relieved. He was being offered a way out of the direct responsibility, and he took it. "Okay, yes, thank you, please. Tell her. I'm so..." He couldn't even finish the sentence. The words "I'm sorry" felt too small, too weak for what had just happened. The kneeling woman turned her attention back to her colleague. "Can you stand up?" she asked softly. "Let's go home. I'm right here with you." Slowly, with great effort, the woman at the piano nodded. She allowed herself to be helped to her feet. Her legs were weak and unsteady. She leaned heavily on her coworker, who supported her without a word. She kept her head down, unable to look at the sea of faces staring at her. Together, the 2 women began the long walk across the ballroom. The crowd parted for them silently, creating a path. People looked away, pretending to be interested in their drinks or the floor, giving them what little privacy they could. The mood in the room had shifted completely. The party was over. The fun was gone. All that was left was the awkward, heavy feeling of having witnessed something deeply private and painful. The manager watched them go, standing alone by the silent grand piano. The spotlight that had once felt so exciting now felt like a harsh, accusing glare. He looked out at the silent, uncomfortable crowd and realized that his grand gesture, his attempt to be the fun boss, had ended in the worst possible way. He had not created a team-building moment. He had caused a moment of profound human suffering. And as the main doors of the ballroom swung shut behind the two women, he was left alone with the weight of what he had done. The cool night air outside the hotel felt like a rescue. It was a shock to her system, but a good one. After the hot, bright, suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom, the quiet darkness of the parking lot felt like a safe blanket. She took a deep, ragged breath, and for the first time since she had sat at that piano, the air actually made it into her lungs. It was cold and clean, washing away the ghostly scent of gardenias and vanilla. Her coworker helped her into the passenger seat of a small, simple car. The interior was tidy and smelled faintly of coffee and clean fabric. It was a normal, real smell, a present-day smell. It helped to anchor her back in the here and now. The coworker didn't try to make conversation. She just started the car, and the soft hum of the engine was another comforting, ordinary sound. They drove in silence through the quiet, sleeping city. Streetlights flowed over the car in warm, golden waves. She leaned her head against the cool window, watching the world go by. The sharp edge of the panic was slowly fading, leaving behind a deep, hollow exhaustion. She felt completely empty, like a shell. All the emotions that had been locked away for 20 years had burst out in one violent explosion. And now there was nothing left inside her but a quiet, aching emptiness. She glanced over at the woman driving. She saw the calm, focused look on her face, the way her hands rested gently on the steering wheel. This woman, who she had only ever exchanged polite greetings with about spreadsheets and deadlines, had been the one to see her. Really see her. While everyone else was staring, she had acted. She had created a shield of kindness between her and the staring crowd. A feeling of deep, overwhelming gratitude washed over her, so strong it brought fresh tears to her eyes. But these were quiet tears, not the desperate, choking sobs from before. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse and raw. The driver glanced over, giving her a small, gentle smile. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have. The manager hadn't, the crowd hadn't, it was her. They reached her apartment building. The co-worker walked with her to her door, making sure she got inside safely. She didn't try to come in or ask any prying questions. She just stood in the hallway as the door opened. "Will you be okay?" she asked. She nodded. "Yes, I will be now. Thank you, really. Get some rest," the coworker said. And with one final kind look, she turned and walked back to the elevator. The silence of her own apartment was different from the silence of the ballroom. This silence was familiar and safe. She stood in the middle of her living room, her fancy dress feeling silly and out of place now. She took it off and put on her soft old pajamas. The normal feeling of the fabric against her skin was another small comfort. She didn't sleep much that night. She just lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The storm of the memory had passed, and in its wake her mind felt strangely clear. She wasn't fighting the thoughts anymore. She let them come. She thought about her mother. She thought about the happy times, the music, the laughter. And for the first time, she also allowed herself to think about the pain, the loss, the empty space that had been left behind. She cried again, but it was a different kind of crying. It wasn't the frantic, trapped feeling from the piano bench. It was a slow, sad, releasing kind of cry. It was a goodbye that she had never properly said. The next Monday morning, the walk from her car to the office building felt longer than the walk across the ballroom. Her stomach was a tight ball of nerves. She dreaded the sideways glances, the whispers, the pity. She pushed the main door open, her heart pounding. But what she found was not what she expected. A few people looked at her, but their looks were not of judgment or cruel curiosity. They were looks of quiet sympathy. A woman from the marketing department gave her a small, warm smile as she passed. The young man from the mailroom nodded to her, his expression kind. When she got to her desk, she found a simple, unmarked plant sitting there. A small, green, healthy succulent in a plain clay pot. There was no card. It was just a quiet, wordless gesture, a message that said, "We see you and we hope you are okay," without having to say anything at all. She felt a lump form in her throat. Later that morning, an email appeared in her inbox. It was a meeting invitation from the manager. The subject line was simple: meeting. Her heart sank. This was it. The official awkward conversation. She went to his office at the appointed time. He was sitting behind his large desk, and he looked more nervous than she was. He stood up quickly when she entered. "Please sit down," he said, his voice unusually quiet. She sat. He didn't go back to his chair. Instead, he came and sat in the chair next to hers, so they were at the same level. He looked down at his hands for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I don't really know how to say this," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "What I did on Friday night, it was wrong. It was thoughtless and stupid. I was trying to be the fun boss, and I ended up being a clown." He looked up at her, and his eyes were full of a genuine pained regret. "I'm so very, very sorry. I had no right to put you in that position. I caused you a great deal of pain, and I will never forgive myself for that." He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't trying to explain it away. He was simply and completely apologizing, and she could see that he truly meant it. She looked at him, this large, confident man who now seemed smaller and more human. The anger and embarrassment she thought she would feel towards him simply didn't come. In its place was a feeling of understanding. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "It was a very difficult moment for me." "I know," he said, "and I am so sorry." They talked for a few more minutes. She didn't tell him the whole story about her mother, but she told him that the piano was connected to a very painful memory from her past. He listened, really listened, and when she was done, he promised her that there would be no more forced fun at company events. The culture was going to change. And it did. Slowly, but surely. The manager became a quieter, more thoughtful leader. He started listening more and talking less. The office atmosphere became more respectful, more genuine. For her, the breakdown at the piano, which had felt like the most humiliating moment of her life, had paradoxically become a kind of beginning. The heavy door she had kept locked for 20 years had been blown open. She couldn't lock it again, so she decided to finally clean out the room. A few months later, she found the card for a therapist that her doctor had given her years ago. She had always thrown those cards away. This time she made an appointment. It was hard, talking about the pain, but each time she did, it felt like she was setting down a heavy stone she had been carrying for miles. One Saturday afternoon, she found herself walking through the city. She wasn't really thinking about where she was going. Her feet just carried her. She stopped in front of a large music store. The window was filled with shiny guitars and brass instruments. She stood there for a long time, just looking. Her heart was beating fast, but it wasn't the same panic from before. It was a nervous but curious feeling. She took a deep breath and walked inside. The store was busy and noisy. People were trying out guitars, tapping on drums. The sound was chaotic, not peaceful like the ballroom had been. She walked past the rows of instruments until she found a quiet corner in the back. There, lined up against the wall, were several digital pianos. They had headphones plugged into them, so you could play without anyone else hearing. She stood in front of one. It was small and modern. Nothing like the grand piano from the hotel or the old one from her childhood. She reached out and touched a key. It was cool and smooth. She sat down on the stool. She put the headphones over her ears. The outside world went silent. She looked at the black and white keys. For a moment, the old fear tried to rise up, but she breathed through it. She thought of her mother, not of the loss, but of the joy. She thought of the happy afternoons, the shared smiles, the beauty of the music they had loved together. Slowly, hesitantly, she placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't play Clair de Lune. That piece belonged to her mother, and she decided for now to let it rest. Instead, she pressed down on a single clear note. It rang pure and true in her headphones. Then she pressed another and another, playing a simple beginner's scale, up and down. The notes were not a song of grief. They were just notes, simple, clean, new. It wasn't a grand performance. It was a small, quiet step, but as she played that simple scale, she felt the tightness in her chest finally completely release. She took a deep, full, easy breath. For the first time in 20 years, she was finally free.